Thank you, Wendy. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tony Bergantino. I'm the director of the Wyoming State Climate Office and the Water Resources Data System. Glad to have you with us for the Conditions and Outlooks webinar this month. That webinar is put on by my office with the help of the U.S. Geological Survey, the Bureau of Reclamation, State Engineer's Office, Bureau of Land Management, the National Weather Service, and the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub and University of Wyoming Extension. And on behalf of those mentioned, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We're going to be looking at current drought and climate conditions, snowpack, surface water status, reservoir operations, some water administration, weather forecasts and outlook, and some fire potential. And then if there is time, we'll touch a little bit on how you can help report what you're seeing in your neck of the woods. So let's start off with current conditions. This is the just released drought monitor map. Before I get too far into that, the link that's highlighted here goes to about a 2.5-minute video that explains some of how the map is created. And if you haven't watched it yet, or you didn't see it last month, you might want to just take a look at it at your leisure. All right, so we have some improvements in the last month in these areas outlined here in green. And even these areas here that are in, I guess that's cyan, are areas that have actually seen a 2 condition improvement since our last webinar. Unfortunately, although those resulted from some precipitation that we had earlier in the month, end of last month, we do have some areas down here in the south that are highlighted in red where things are starting to deteriorate. Owing to them missing out on some of it. Hopefully in the coming days, we see a little bit more in some of these areas, but that is the current status of things. Here's taking a look at 14-day precipitation as a percentile. You can see some areas of concern over here in the west, especially Lincoln, Sublette County, extending into the surrounding counties, Teton, Sweetwater, Uinta. Also a little bit over here in the south where we're seeing some of these redder areas on the map indicating deficits in precipitation. We do have some better areas such as up here in Park spilling over into Teton County where we're above the median, and then this whole area over here in the east where we're seeing these nice greens and even some blues. The white areas are areas that are right about the median precipitation over the last 2 weeks. Looking at the same map, but over a 90-day period, we see some of the same areas, especially southern Lincoln County, the western side of the winds up into Teton, and then again here down in the south, where we're not seeing as much as we'd like to. But then we still have some good areas here that are seeing above median precipitation, especially in central Fremont County, up into the Bighorn Basin, and then up into the northeast part of the state, up here in Campbell and Cook counties. This is the standardized precipitation evapotranspiration index, and that's made up of precipitation and evapotranspiration data and gives a little bit of sense of the water coming into the system via precipitation. And then also the other balance side of that is where we're losing moisture into the atmosphere. And since it is an index, the values range from a little bit less than -2 on the low side up to over +2 on the high side. And values negative, as we're seeing down here, it's dry, and if we're in the blue areas where it's positive, it's wet. And these are showing 30, 60, and then 1-year durations of that index. And as you can see in the short term, a lot of areas we're seeing the short-term wetness creeping in here out to 60 days and even further if we were to look at some of the maps in between. But we do have dryness still sitting in the system here down in the south. And you can see in the 1 year, the longer term effects of the drought that we're in with basically the entire map, except for a little bit up here in the far northwest part of Fremont County. You might not even be able to see a little bit of wet area. Moving to temperature, this is the 14-day average minimum temperature over the last 2 weeks. We can see up here in the upper right, lows are below 32 in the west and higher elevations, but above freezing for for the rest of the area over here in the plains and down into the central part of the state. And looking at that as a departure from normal over here, plus or minus 3 degrees Fahrenheit in all parts except for the southeast, which is 3 to 6 degrees above the median, above the average really for the last 2 weeks. And then some of the higher elevations over here, we're seeing up to 6 degrees below the normal for nighttime temperatures over the last 2 weeks. And looking at the same thing, but for maximum temperatures, our average max over the last 2 weeks has pretty much been above freezing statewide. There might be a few little twinges at very high elevations here where we're seeing down just barely below that, but for all intents and purposes, we're above freezing for daytime temperatures. Looking at that as a departure from normal, higher elevations, a little bit cooler, obviously, sort of a west to east warming compared to the normal, where you get down here in the southeast corner of the state in Laramie County, we're up to 6 degrees above the average for the maximum temperatures. Now looking at soil moisture, this is compared to 2 weeks ago over here on the left and current today's, or actually yesterday's really, on the right here. And we had conditions a lot better now than they were a month ago, except for Uinta, Lincoln, Southern Teton counties. But then we got that snow latter part of April into very early May that really improved things. But now we're on the downhill slide from that, and you can see quite a bit of deterioration, especially across the south. Northwest is better, northeast is getting better, but we're having some problems with it down here in the south, where we got a lot of that red and deep red starting to creep in. And this is the timeline of drought since 2000. We decreased in the amount of D3. You can barely see this line over here starting to go down here in the last week. And from the last webinar, we were down about 1.5% in the extent of the D3. Everything else is still there though. So with D0 to D4, we're still at 100% of the state is covered in some sort of D category. The yellow here is not technically drought, it's just abnormally dry, but it's still an alert condition. And just sort of emphasize that it's been 36 weeks now that we've had the entire state with that D category. And this is just looking at from the beginning of 2020 through present, so you can get a more exploded view of it and see some of the detail of the ups and downs of the various categories. Now moving on to snowpack, we're on the downward side of everything. Snowpack is coming off, and you can see the map here. A lot of green within 10% of the median here in the north central, northwest part of the state, and dropping down here in the southeast and over here, especially in the Bear. But because we are this late in the season and we do have melt going on, this is a kind of a misleading map. And especially if you take a look at something like this, which is the peak snowpack that we reached during the year. And despite the fact that that map that I just showed looked pretty good, in no basin in the state did we reach the median snowpack. We did reach it later, which is a good sign, because it'll linger on a little bit longer into time, but we did not get near the amount of snowpack normal. 5 basins were within about 10%, but the rest of them are considerably less. And that's why when you see that, and here's a good example of why that the Madison Basin was at 94%, and you can see we're right here tacking close to that median line. But when you see what the median snowpack peak is, we were significantly less. And so a good way of illustrating that is this particular map, which shows the median snowpack this year compared to, or the peak this year compared to the median peak. And you can see a lot less of green on the map. Yellowstone Basin at 92% in the central, north central part of the state, within 5% to so of the median. But a lot more of that 75 to 90% showing up, and a little bit more here in the orange, which is 50 to 75% of median. So while it might look good right now when you're just comparing what today is to the median today, the season as itself was not as good. And this next one is a comparison of that to what we saw in 2021. So on the upper left here, this is 2021 compared to the peak of snowpack, and on the left or on the right here, we have 2022. And you can see some areas are doing worse than most, in fact, but you have especially Powder River last year, 106, Powder River this year, only 85. So down here, this table here is a sort of a combination, subtraction of the 22 from the 21. And except for 5 basins, which were above, better than last year, the rest of them, with the exception of the Shoshone, which was about exactly the same, everything else did poorly compared to last year. And those ones that are above this year are only by up to 5%. So not as good a snowpack year this year as last. And this says, as a result of that, here's what the expected stream flows are to be. This is for the May through July forecasted period. This is the 50% chance of exceedance, so it's the likely values. Several of the basins within 10% up here in the Northwest, and even the upper North Platte, Laramie, 93, 97%, but the rest of the state, especially the Lower Green and the Cheyenne, significantly less than the median flow expected for going into this season, which is a good stopping spot to jump to Aaron Fiaschetti with the USGS to talk to us about surface water. Go ahead, Aaron.
Thanks, Tony. So here we are, mid to late May, and what I'm presenting here is it's a cumulative hydrograph for the state of Wyoming. It's a little bit of a black box here on how many sites are calculated in the state to produce this hydrograph. But what I wanted to show you here is that we have the greens are the median or a normal flow, that 25th to 75th percentile, and then the dark or the brighter orange is 10 to 24th percentile, so that's a low flow, and then the browns are a very low flow below the 10th percentile. And what I just wanted to convey here is that that black line is 2022, and we're well on our way into the rising limb of the hydrograph and approaching our peak stream flows for the season here within the next month from right now. So runoff is here if your snowpack or if your water supply comes from the mountains. So that's a welcome sign. So next slide, please. So here's the dot map from the National Water Information dashboard, and the percentiles and colors are the same from that previous hydrograph. So that green is a normal flow. It's a pretty wide range, and if you kind of bounce around the state and look around at all our gauges, there's a fair amount of green out there, but if you look a little bit closer, most of those flows are below the median for the day. There's a couple all-time lows for the day here. One of them is down at the Bear River at State Line, and then there's a couple of tributaries to the Snake River around Jackson Hole that are showing some pretty low flows for the day. There's the blues, the light blues and the dark blues are some higher flows, and you see a little bit of that down in the upper end of the Platte drainage. Next slide, please. So this is just a summation of that chart that I showed you. So it's showing that the majority of sites are 60% of the sites are normal, and then 12% or actually close to 22% are below normal or much below normal when you combine those two categories. And just looking at what's increasing or decreasing, they're about 50 split there, 36% are increasing in flow and 40% are decreasing. So it's a bit of a mixed bag on flows increasing or decreasing through the state. Next slide, please. So just kind of bouncing around from site to site, looking here at the North Fork of the Shoshone. kind of a pretty bouncy hydrograph in the last month or so. We see that pretty good spike in the beginning of May, then it drops down, and then it's back up. So as temperatures warm and cool, or some precipitation moves through the system, we're seeing kind of a bouncy hydrograph in some of these locations, but we're getting pretty close to our peak there. And right now things look okay. So next slide. Be moving over to the powder. Oh, big hornet cane. So flows are increasing over there. You kind of see a similar spike in the early part of May, then flows drop back down and back up. Pretty highly managed system here. So, but right now there's a fair amount of water moving through the system, and it looks like it's pretty close to the median for right now. Moving over to the powder Arvada, saw a pretty good spike in flow here in the early part of May. It looks like we have a little bit of missing data there, but flows have dropped back down into a little bit below the median. So right now things on the powder look pretty okay. And then moving down towards the North Platte at state line, flows have been low and they continue to get quite a bit lower. You can see that below the 10th percentile drops almost all the way to no flow there at this time of year. So these flows are certainly not unheard of at this time, but very low flow at that location. And then moving over to the Green River below Fontenelle, flows have been kind of steadily maintained about at the same CFS since the beginning of the year. But right now with those flows held at that flow rate, it's starting to get down into the pretty low percentiles. Normally more water would be moving through the system as it goes down river. So steady flows there, but they're starting to get into a much lower percentile when compared to normal for this time of year. Moving on to reservoirs, as we're starting to see some water come into the system real recently. We're seeing some small increases in storage, but since runoff, there's probably not going to be a lot of it, and it hasn't been happening for long in general across the state. We've seen some increases of 3 to 5% in storage over the last month. So no dramatic changes there, but in general, most reservoirs are starting to increase in their storage. And that's all I have. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Aaron. And now we have Liz Cresto with the Bureau of Reclamation, who will talk about reservoir operations. Liz?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Liz Cresto with the Bureau of Reclamation. I work out of the Wyoming area office, and we cover two systems, the Bighorn system and the North Platte. So let's start off with the Bighorn system, which is shown in that blue shading in the map. So the Bighorn system, as of the May 17th, was 67% full, or 96% of average. Bull Lake is 59% full. We're expected that to fill this year. Buffalo Bill is at 357,000 acre feet, or just 55% of full. We're actually not expecting Buffalo Bill to fill. Boisen's at 588,000 acre feet, or 79% full. And we are expecting Boisen to fill this year. So next slide. So we do runoff forecasts at the beginning of the month, but we're constantly looking at changing conditions. But our forecast as of May 1 for Buffalo Bill, and this is a forecast for the time period of April through July, which is when we get the majority of our annual runoff. So for Buffalo Bill, our anticipated runoff is 600,000 acre feet, or 81% of average. So far, during this April through May 17th timeframe, we've received about 66,000 acre feet. Boisen is at, or the the May 1 forecast for the time period April through July is 500,000 acre feet or 83% of average. And so far, we received about 72,000 acre feet of runoff. So on the right part of the slide is kind of cartoonish schematic of the system. Starting off at Buffalo Bill, we're releasing 1,300 CFS, and that's as measured at the Cody gauge. And that's for the release rate is meeting downstream irrigation demand. We're expecting to make releases for the remainder of the season just to meet those downstream demands. Bull Lake is currently releasing 50 CFS, and as that reservoir begins to fill, those releases will change as we move through the season. So Poison Reservoir, we're releasing 2,200 CFS, and that's at or near power plant capacity. And that too, as we move through the runoff season, those flows may change as conditions change as well. So let's switch over to the North Platte side of things. So as of May 17th, the North Platte system was 61% full or 87% of average. And on that bottom kind of table shows the reservoir content, the capacity, the percent fill, and the percent of average. So our forecast for the North Platte system, starting off with Seminole, our runoff forecast is 510,000 acre feet or just 72% of average. Sweetwater above Pathfinder at 66% of average. Alcova to Glendo at 76% of average. So when we do our operating plans, we're based off of our forecast. We also do forecasts of drier than normal and wetter than normal conditions. And under all of our forecasts and plans, whether it turns dry or wetter, Seminole and Pathfinder are unlikely to fill this year. Seminole releases are to be cut off in June to facilitate a roof replacement project. And Glendo is to fill in June, and then irrigation demands will slowly draw down the reservoir. And Guernsey is currently filling to meet summer operating levels. So let's go on to the next slide. And that shows our schematic of what we're releasing right now. So Seminole releases are about 1,500 CFS. Alcova Gray Reef releases are 500. Glendo releases are 1,400 CFS and will be varied based on the irrigation demands. Guernsey releases are 1,000 CFS and will be varied also based on those irrigation demands. Releases from Guernsey Reservoir began on May 14th to transfer storage water from the main stem reservoir down the interstate canal to inland lakes. And while some of the delivery of irrigation water expected, most of the North Platte irrigation districts plan to hold off diversions until June to conserve the water supply. So that's just a quick synopsis of what's going on our systems. And I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Liz.
Thanks.
And Jeff Cowley with the State Engineer's Office here for Water Rights Administration. Jeff.
Thank you, Tony. We can get started here. There's a map, better depiction of the divisions and districts in Wyoming. As I've shown before, starting in the lower right-hand corner of the map is Division 1, pretty much all tribs to the North Platte. Move up counterclockwise to Division 2. That's Cheyenne River, Belfouche River, Powder River, and Tongue River. Moving to the left a little bit is Division 3, Bighorn River and all of its tributaries. And then if you come down one more, Division 4, we've got Snake River, Bear River, Green River tributaries heading out of that division. And there's some contact information with the kind of attached spatially to where they go. So if you have certain questions on your specific division, those are the guys you're going to want to call and talk to. Next slide, Tony. So if we start in Division 1, as of May 1st, give or take a couple days, we got the Bureau call that we weren't at 1.1 million again for that month. And during this time frame, that limits irrigation pumpers that divert from the main stem of the North Platte, there between Pathfinder and Guernsey. It limits them to 6,600 acre feet every 2 weeks. And obviously hydrology can change, but we expect that call to be on for the rest of the irrigation season, just because it's going to take a lot of rain to be able to lift that call. So keeping our fingers crossed, but probably not likely. On May 6th, we got a call on Jack Creek and its tributaries, which are in District 6, which is it's above Seminole, so it's in the Saratoga area. And that is to a priority date of 1882. So quick history on Wyoming. Wyoming became a state in 1890. So that right is a territorial right on Jack Creek. So just be aware of that. Next slide, Tony. Division 2, the more orange division up there, as of May 9th, if you were on last month, where there was a call from Montana to fill Tongue River Reservoir. Hydrology changed rather quickly. As soon as that call was made, we got a lot of snow that really altered the predictions of that reservoir filling. So on May 9th, Montana released us from that call, or released that call, whatever the proper terminology is. And then on May 14th, there was a call on Big Goose Creek, which is District 4. Next slide. Division 3, March 30th, there was a call on Gooseberry Creek, and that's to a priority date of 1906. April 8th, there was a call on Owl Creek, and again, that was a priority date of 1888, so a territorial. May 6th, there was a call on Grass Creek to a priority date of 1903. Next slide, Tony. Division 4 didn't have any calls last time we talked, and now there are 4, even though April 29th, I think, was right around their meeting, but give or take. There's a call on North Piney Creek, District 10. May 9th, there's a call on the Central Bear River, which is an interstate call. That's District 2. May 16th, there was a call on Fish Creek, another tributary in District 10. And May 17th, there's a call on the Black Fork River, which is District 15. And if you were watching, Tony was hovering with his cursor over those districts to give you a more generalized idea of where those are. So I think last slide, Tony. Again, here's our contact information. If you have something specific in your area you want to talk about, these folks are certainly there to help you with exactly what's going on the ground. And if you have any other questions, certainly feel free to contact me if you'd like to have some a little less specific answer. But thank you, Tony. We can pass it on to the next one.
Thanks, Jeff. And now we have Joe Lester with the National Weather Service office in Billings, who will talk to us about weather forecasts and outlooks.
All right, thanks, Tony. Go ahead there. All right, so first, this is a precipitation outlook for the next 7 days, and a little bit of a summary here. We're actually in the process of changing our weather pattern as we speak. We have a cold front moving southward through Wyoming today. It is, as of, like I said, as I'm speaking, it is currently through Casper, not yet to Cheyenne, in the 70s and dry and windy down across the south. And last I checked, snowing in the 30s at Buffalo, and snow a little bit in Cody as well. So we are going to see some changes here through today and tonight, and a somewhat significant precipitation event for the southeast part of the state, the Medicine Bows, and then also across the eastern slopes. And precipitation amounts anywhere from 3/4 of an inch up to a little under 2 inches, greatest amounts over the higher terrain. But we are looking at also some wet snow for the lower elevations, Cheyenne, and then even extending down into Colorado. But and that's taken effect tonight, Thursday night, all the way into Saturday. So some precipitation down there. Otherwise, over the next 7 days, greatest precipitation will be over the mountains, anywhere from 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches, generally speaking. Not really too much for the lower elevations. It's, like I said, mainly a pattern for the southeast part of the state. There is a chance that we could see another disturbance move through Sunday night, Monday, that could give a little better shot for some lower elevations Kind of unsure about that yet, but for the most part, over the mountainous areas, we'll see the brunt of the precipitation. Below normal temperatures from behind this front today through the first part of next week. It is a generally cold and somewhat active weather pattern with at least a chance of snow showers over the mountains each day. Below normal temperatures through the first part of next week. And what that will do is at least we'll hit the pause button as far as mountain snow melt goes. So we'll add a little bit of SWE up there and we'll prevent some melting over the next several days. Go ahead, Tony. And looking beyond the next few days, the 6 to 10 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center is really highlighting Wyoming in a low confidence either way, kind of near normal, maybe a little bit above normal temperature and below normal precip in the south. But otherwise not a real clear signal there as we move towards the last week of May. Let's go ahead, Tony. 8 to 14 day outlook, which takes us into the beginning of June. Similar to the 6 to 10 day, there's not a real strong signal near normal, except for perhaps the far south or southeast, which will be closer to an area of above normal temperatures, which will be widespread in the southern plains, and then below normal precipitation across the southern part of the Rockies. So Wyoming, again, in kind of the transition between wetter conditions to the north of Wyoming and drier conditions and warmer to the south. Okay, go ahead. So from the Climate Prediction Center, the 3-month outlook for June through August was just released this morning. And FYI, those are seasonal outlooks are released the third Thursday of each month. And as we transition out of spring into summer, and this has been the case, but it still looks to be the case, is the signal is for a likely warmer than normal summer, as you can see on the left side there, and a leaning towards drier than normal for precipitation. I can say that we are still in a La Nina out in the tropical Pacific, and La Ninas are typically for the northern and central part of the Rockies, lean towards a drier and normal, or drier and warmer than normal summer. So that is how it's currently looking. Again, for June, July, August, the 3-month period as a whole. The hope is that we can keep holding things back a little bit like we're doing over the next several days with some cooler than normal temperatures. And if we can keep holding back the snow melt any little bit, helps. That's all I've got. Back to you, Tony. Oh, well, I'm sorry, one more graph here. The flood potential, already kind of touched on this a little bit, but basically what we're looking at here is across the state, these green markers show a less than 50% chance of seeing flooding over the period from May through July. So the snow melt period, low chances of flooding everywhere. So basically it's likely that we will not see flooding unless there's some kind of major precipitation event in the cards over the next month or so. But our time is really running out for something like that to happen. So a very low chance of flooding across the area. Okay, Tony.
Thanks, Joe. And now we have Joel Peters, that's with the Bureau of Land Management in Lander, is up next to discuss.
All right, thank you, Tony. So we'll cover some of the kind of fuel moisture conditions that we're currently experiencing throughout the state. We'll kind of get started on the energy release component, a little bit of definition stuff we'll go through for those that aren't super familiar with it. It's basically that a number that's related to the amount of heat per unit area that fuels are able to produce at the flaming front of a fire. So it's also a good composite fuel moisture value because it incorporates some of the live and dead fuels into potential fire intensity. So that plays into our current conditions right now in the spring with green up that we'll get into here in a little bit on where our numbers are. So a good kind of food for thought on ERC as a campfire scenario. Folks that aren't familiar with it is in the springtime, trying to light a fire with some kind of green wood. Really doesn't put out much heat, kind of smoky, not good combustion. You take that same wood that's had a chance to sit there from springtime all the way into August, has that drying periods, it's dried out. That fire puts out way more heat as you stand by it. So that's kind of just a kind of simple way to look at it. Those ERC numbers are generally expressed as a percentile, not a specific number, because they're not very, it's not relative across the state. An ERC number in the northwest part of the state and one in the southeastern part of the state, that specific number doesn't really mean anything. So they're generally expressed as a percentile. Moving into some of the specific fuel moisture size classes, the 1,000-hour fuel moistures, it's a pretty good indicator of drought overall and the kind of general characteristics of an area for the current fire danger. Basically, those are those large diameter fuels, greater than 3 inches. So the logs and things like that are laying on the forest floor. They're that good drought indicator just due to the fact that they're so large that even if it rains on them, it takes quite a bit of moisture to get the moisture content up in them, but also a longer drying period to get them down to where they will consume and burn. So it can provide a decent indicator of drought in some fairly site-specific areas. That 1,000-hour fuel moisture is based on a 7-day average, so that that can change a bit over time as you do get some of those increases in relative humidities and/or precipitation that can occur on those. So there will be some dips and dives in those moistures, but generally still an overall good characteristic of drought. Into the 110s and 1-hour fuels, that's just kind of those smaller diameter fuels that will consume readily in wildfires. They're much more along a site-specific area and what the fuel conditions are there. So, a 1-hour fuel moisture, those 0 to 1/4 inch fuels, generally that's our grass fuel type. So a lot of the range fuels fall under that. And that's a big concern is going to be coming up here as our cheatgrass starts to cure out. Those are the fuels that are in that realm. You might get moisture on it, which can be helpful for a very short amount of time. And those fuels are once again ready and available to burn over a quick period of time. As that storm passes and the sun comes back out, relative humidities drop and become available again. And then our live fuel moistures. This time of year, that's a big part of what's going on out throughout the state. So our fuels are transitioning out of dormancy for the big portion of the state right now. We are in that green up, which is a good thing. And then, as the summer progresses, they'll continue to dry out, in some cases die, and then go into dormancy for the perennial plants. Next slide, please. Next graph is out of the Rocky Mountain Coordination Center out of Colorado. These are some of the remote automated weather stations that, so they're kind of site specific for those locations, but good. I mean, we're looking at green. We're below that 50th percentile there, which that's a really good thing. That's shown throughout the state that we are in green up, even if some areas are definitely greener than others, but a couple exceptions in there. Down by Rock Springs and then south and east of Casper, where they're in more of the 50th to 69th percentile. And they're so site specific that sometimes, some precipitation events can actually make that change into the green or go the other direction. I kind of expanded the map a little bit down into Colorado just to kind of show what our neighbors to the south are dealing with. They've got places that are in the 97th and above, and quite a few areas in the 90th to 96th percentile. Those are numbers that you would expect to see in Wyoming, in our heart of the fire season, late July and August. And some portions of Colorado are already experiencing those values for their raw stations, which is definitely not a good thing. So Wyoming's looking a lot better in that area just due to that live fuel component. That's a big part of the computation for that energy release component. So Wyoming's looking good there for now. Next slide, thank you. Current status from throughout the state. So these are just some kind of groupings of those averages of the remote automated weather stations. Here we're looking at Southwest Wyoming High Desert, pulled from the other day. So they're looking, they were one of the areas that had some of the yellow in it. So they're definitely above average, making a climb here. Hopefully some of this, precip will be widespread and it'll help bring those areas back down more to near average and get that drop down as they're creeping up on kind of that max line, for this time of year. Next slide. Next one would be the grouping around Fort Laramie, Cheyenne area. They're also definitely above average, have taken a pretty recent spike there with their conditions. And once again, also, making a trip towards that max line. And we'll see, hopefully those conditions there will moderate as well. Next slide. And here's kind of just an example of the Wind River Mountains and their grouping of RAWS stations, where they're actually sitting pretty good. They're below average for ERCs for this time of year, which is indicative of some of the stuff that everybody else has shown with that snowpack level and amount of precip. And you can see in pretty much all of these graphs, it's shown very well here in that light gray average line. We're really starting to hit that point where green up is going to start waning on us, and we are going to start having those ERCs climb as we get into the June, July, and out into August, kind of the peak of the fire season. We're in that dip of green up, which is a good thing for this time of year. But shortly here, those ERCs throughout the state are definitely going to climb. Some localized precip and storms can help moderate that, but we'll definitely see some increase in those values here moving forward, depending on what we receive for weather in those different parts of the state. And this might be the last one. Took a couple large scale snippet slides. One's for the May significant fire potential outlook. Zooming in on Wyoming there, we got some creep into the southeast portion of the state down there of being above normal, but otherwise pretty normal throughout the state. And that's well, normal for May for us, just due to green up and things like that. And the conditions we have right now, just kind of looking out into June. These should be updated soon. So very shortly, these graphs will, kick over and they'll update the June one for the current month. So that one's a little bit old, but definitely showing some creep out of Colorado, moving north into the mountains there of some above normal potential, and then obviously up in the Gillette, Campbell County portion of the state as well. So a lot of that's it's going off of all the forecasted weather, above normal temperatures and all those kinds of things that can't always perfectly see that picture. So hopefully we'll continue to get some precip, that maybe some unexpected storms, and it'll help moderate some of these conditions going into the summer. We'll definitely have some sort of fire season, but hopefully we'll kind of get that weather to help moderate as much as possible, and we'll enjoy green up as long as we can before we get into fire season.
All right, thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Now back to me to talk a little bit about how to get involved. And first thing we'll do here is just a little recap of the U.S. Drought Monitor that was released this morning, effective Tuesday. We did see those improvements mostly in the northern part of the state, although we did see a batch down here in the southeast. Concern here with soil moisture drying out, that we could see deterioration, which we did see here in the last week down here in the south part of the state. The longer term dryness still an issue, and with those outlooks for the June, July, August time period that we saw, with likely above normal and probably below normal precipitation, likely above temperature below precip. We got to keep an eye on things. So I'd like to talk a little about what you can do to help us keep this map accurate and up to date. Two programs that I'd like to detail here, where you can let us know what you're experiencing. Because the more input that we receive from around the state on the conditions and impacts that are being felt on the ground, the more accurate that map can be. And the first is through the Condition Monitoring Observer Report, or CMOR system. The URL is highlighted here up on the upper left here. And here you can submit a report detailing what you're seeing as far as impacts in your area on a variety of categories, whether it's crops, livestock, fire, surface water, etc. And not just, if it's dry, but you can also report on the wet side of the scale as well. You can include photographs. Single photograph will show conditions and show what it's currently at, but it's kind of hard to tell, from one picture, just how out of the ordinary that is. So if you can include a picture that has, from a similar vantage point, showing, pretty much the same area during what is normal or usual, I guess. It makes the photo of the current conditions a lot more useful. And I would stress that these photos, when they're uploaded, are available to the public. The other way that you can help us out is to become a COCORAS observer. And while you can send in condition reports through the COCORAS system, the original thrust of this program was to get a better idea of the differences in precipitation over short distances. And observers can set up it's a 4-inch diameter rain gauge that they can submit their precipitation readings online each morning. This map here on the lower left, or the left really, shows the reports as of about 7 a.m. this morning. We can see some precipitation over here in Teton, Park counties coming in, and up in Sheridan as the system starts to move in. But by and large, the rest of the state, with one little exception in here, which is still kind of minor, is all reporting 0. And those zeros are important because we need to know where it's not raining or precipitating just as much as we need to know where it is. So that 0 is as valid a number as any other. And we can't assume that if there's no report that there means there was nothing to report. So it has to be a 0 to be taken into effect. And this map over here on the right shows the potential observers in the state. These are people who have signed up and been active in the last year or two. But you can see there's a lot of open areas. So really would like to have observers, any that can sign up. It doesn't matter if you have a neighbor 2 blocks away, you all need to take vacation. So your reports will come in while your neighbor is on vacation and vice versa. And this map, I'll close with here, shows this is the particular stations that went into a precipitation grid for the 12th of April of this year. You can see there's quite a few different networks that are involved. There's the COCORAS there in that reddish color, National Weather Service co-op program, and this sort of lightish purple, and then a number of others, SNOTEL for the higher elevation snow sites. But you can see circled here is the one thing common to all these networks, and that is gaps. And so if we can just fill in some of these gaps, it makes the data that show up in these areas a lot more accurate, and not having to interpolate across as wide open spaces as we do have to do in some of these areas. And the URL for that is down here, or you can contact me or Wendy via the information that's on this slide. And so this concludes the webinar. I'd like to thank all of our presenters whose names and affiliations are shown on this slide. And on behalf of them, thank you for joining us today. And with that, I will turn it over to Wendy Kelly, who is with the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub and University of Extension, to take us into questions.
Great, thank you, Tony. And thanks again to all the presenters as well as the attendees. We appreciate you all logging in today. And I'm just going through the chat to see if any chats came in, as well as the Q&A. If you have any questions, now is a good time to drop them in the chat, or you can do it in the Q&A. If you're not sure how to do that, you can take your pointer on your screen and move it towards the bottom of your Zoom box. And then you should see a set of icons appear, one being a chat icon and another is a Q&A icon. So you're welcome to go ahead and do that, and I'll pause for a moment to see if any come in. And while I wait for a moment, I do have a question for Joel. I am curious, based on what we saw for the wildland outlook and looking at more southern states, Colorado, New Mexico, etc. If there are concerns about resources being available this summer, or how that is being discussed in terms of the wildland season.
Oh, there you go. I had trouble with my video. So currently, resource shortages aren't too big of an issue yet, just because most of the activity right now is in the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico. They're definitely heavily impacted by wildfires right now. Colorado is occurring, they're having some wildfires as well. We're just not to the point yet of resource shortages. But as, every year we're seeing more and more of those shortages come in. So if, let's say the monsoons don't come into the Southwest like we would expect, it kind of prolongs their fire season. And then more of the country, as you move north into Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, starts getting into their fire season. Even if we're not having large scale catastrophic wildfires, but just enough to, keep folks busy, that is what really will impact shortages of resources moving forward. So currently, things are doing pretty well. A lot of the fire resources in Wyoming right now are in that training mode. We've got all the seasonals hired, Forest Service alike, state as well, and getting ready to go. But I would anticipate, looking at the outlooks for, Oregon, California, the like, if Wyoming gets busy and those areas are busy as well, like they have been the past few years, there will definitely be some resource shortages for sure on the horizon.
Great, thanks. And there was a question that came in from Aaron about whether we can expect a spread of above normal wildfire potential for the latter half of the summer for here in Wyoming or surrounding states. And Aaron knows that it's an extended outlook, but if anyone, Joel, if you might be able to address that question, and it's in the chat if you would like to read it.
So I hate to get too far out with some of the outlooks that they produce out of the Rocky Mountain Coordination Center and NIFC out of Boise. But if we look at some of the, the maps that were shown a little bit ago out of the Billings Weather Service they're showing, above average temperatures and less precip, which is that's gonna equal the potential anyway for above normal chances of wildfires. So that stuff's a ways out. It can change, things can get better, things can get worse. So I would anticipate as the fire season generally does start in the Southwest like it did this year and moves its way north. And there's a lot of conditions that we just can't predict yet. It will move to us. How bad it's going to be is yet to be seen. Some of that timing of the monsoonal moisture is big, and how that comes in, whether Wyoming gets the kind of leading edge of that or not, and we get moisture from it, or we just get lightning out of it, depending on how that comes in, is going to make a big difference on what happens to us. So I would definitely anticipate some of those maps that I showed at the end were the red of the above normal. That's going to creep into Wyoming into July and August, unless we get some significant moisture that helps moderate that. And then hopefully those will be shown if people join this, in the coming months, that, the closer we are to that time period, the better those predictions will be. So we'll kind of see where that goes.
Great, thanks, Joel. And we did get another question that came in from Amanda that I'll probably direct to either Tony or Jeff. Amanda wanted to know if there is a map that is available to the public that shows where the weather stations are scheduled to be installed through the Army Corps of Engineer, the grant that was received for Wyoming as well as other states in the upper Missouri River Basin region.
And I'll take that one. And if I can here, I'm going to see if I can switch my screen. I don't know if I want to stop sharing here, but let me see if I can. Let's see what happens. And I can show you a map of that. Just share again. All right, is that visible to everybody?
Yes, it is.
Okay. The stations are going to be going into each of these. Let's see if I can move over here and point. Each of these square spots here is where there's going to be a station going in. And currently we have the 2 stations installed here at Powell and in Sheridan that are currently up and active. We hope to get a couple more stations in this area here in the coming, about 7 stations in this year. And then we're going to start moving over into the northwest or northeast part of the state to install some more in the coming year.
Hey, Tony.
Yeah.
This is Joe here, the Billings office. My understanding also is that those locations have yet to be determined. I know we've had those questions in Montana as well.
That's correct.
And
We
so-
know the grid cell they're going to be going into, but we do not know the exact location just because of getting landowner permissions and siting and everything for that. So we have the rough area where they will be going. There will be 1 in each of those squares.
Great questions. Thank you, Aaron and Amanda, for those. I'll just take a peek to see if any additional questions have come in. Right, I don't see any additional questions. So with that, I think this wraps up our May webinar, and I want to thank each of the presenters and the partnering agencies again for taking the time today to pull this webinar together, as well as each of the attendees for joining. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you again next month. Thank you.